7-year-old Lunar came with every coin she had, not to buy a dog but wants his beloved back, the only memory of her dad she had left. One girl's silent grief echoed louder than any words ever could. Sometimes, family isn't who you're born with, it's who fights for you when it matters most. This is more than a story. It's a second chance. The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the crowded Willow Creek Community Center. 7-year-old Lunar Dawson clutched her pink ceramic piggy bank to her chest, the soft clinking of coins inside barely audible over her pounding heart and blurry tears. 40,000, the auctioneer called, his voice firm and commanding. Do I hear 45? Lunar's tearful eyes followed the rising bidding paddles, each one a slash to her fragile hope. Across the room stood Ranger, her late father's canine partner, a powerful German shepherd whose loyal gaze swept anxiously over the sea of faces. His ears suddenly perked up, locking on Lunar's tiny frame. With a sudden, urgent pull, Ranger lunged at his leash, startling the officer holding him. A low whimper cut through the murmurs in the hall as Ranger strained toward the girl. The handler regained control, but not before everyone in the room saw that undeniable bond between the child and the dog. Beside Lunar, Emma Dawson slipped an arm gently around her daughter's trembling shoulders, holding her close as fresh tears slid down Lunar's cheeks. This was more than simply a pet up for auction. This was Lunar's last living link to her father, Officer Mark Dawson, killed in the line of duty 5 years ago. Since that day their world fell apart. Luna hadn't spoken a word to anyone except Ranger. Her father's shadow lived in that dog. 45,000, a man near the front called out, his tone cold and confident. Lunar's breath hitched. Fear squeezed her chest. They couldn't afford to match that. Greg Taylor, Lunar's stepfather, shifted awkwardly beside them, a flicker of relief in his expression that Lunar didn't yet understand. Greg believed the dog was holding Lunar back, but Emma knew better. Lunar's small hands trembled around the fragile piggy bank she had filled over the years, every birthday dollar, every spare coin, all in hopes of someday bringing Ranger home. 50,000, came another bid. The voice belonged to Victor Langston, the powerful head of a private security firm, clearly determined to win. Lunar looked up at her mother, eyes wide, her expression one of panic and heartbreak. Emma leaned down, gently brushing her daughter's tear-streaked cheek. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice breaking. We'll figure something out. But deep down, Lunar knew. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was the only soul who remembered her father the way she did. The only one she trusted enough to speak to in 5 long, silent years. Her grip on the piggy bank tightened as hope began to slip through her fingers like the coins she had counted so carefully. Then a calm voice rose from the back of the hall. 60,000, he said, steady and final. The crowd turned. Lunar's eyes found Lee Granger, a quiet, reclusive rancher known for his wealth, though he rarely attended public events. Emma's breath caught. She had no idea why someone like Lee would step in. But for the first time that evening, a fragile spark of hope flickered inside her. The room went silent. All eyes shifted to Victor Langston, whose jaw clenched, but he remained silent. 60,000, the auctioneer confirmed, going once, going twice, sold. Applause followed, but Lunar barely heard it. Lee Granger had won the bid, but what did that mean for Ranger? And for her? She held her piggy bank tighter, locking eyes with the dog across the room. He stood perfectly still, watching her with a quiet, serious gaze. It was as if he understood what was hanging in the air between them. Lunar silently prayed this wasn't goodbye. That night, she sat by her bedroom window, watching snow drift softly over Willow Creek. The room around her was filled with whispers of the past, old photos, drawings, and a worn stuffed animal held close. In the doorway, Emma watched her daughter, heart aching. 5 years had passed, yet the loss of Mark still felt like yesterday. He had been the heart of their family, respected, brave, and deeply loved in the community. And wherever Mark had gone, Ranger had been right beside him. Emma remembered the day their world shattered, her routine bust gone wrong, the devastating phone call, the funeral. Ranger had survived, but something in him had changed, just like Lunar. After that day, her voice vanished. Only Ranger seemed to bring pieces of her back. Greg Taylor had stepped into their lives 2 years after Mark's death, offering what seemed like stability and a second chance at normalcy. At first, Emma Dawson had believed his steady presence might help Lunar heal, but Greg never truly grasped the bond between Lunar and Ranger. He saw the dog as a living relic, a thread that held Lunar bound in sorrow. One quiet evening, as Emmer passed the kitchen doorway, she paused. Greg was on the phone, his voice low and tense. Her heart skipped when she heard a name, Victor Langston. Langston was the owner of a significant private security company and had always expressed interest in purchasing Ranger for business purposes. "I'll talk to Emmer again," Greg said into the phone, "but I can't guarantee anything." Emmer stepped in, eyes narrowed. "Who was that?" Her voice was tight as she asked. Greg lowered his phone and sighed, folding his arms. "Victor Langston. He still wants Ranger. Claims that the dog requires direction and structure." Emmer's expression turned sharp. "He has a purpose," she replied coldly. "Her name is Luna. He's the only one she truly connects with him." Greg shook his head, frustration building. "But maybe that's the problem, Emmer. She's not moving forward. Maybe the dog's holding her back." A surge of anger rose in Emmer's chest. "Ranger is the last link to her father. If we take that away, we risk losing her completely." Greg looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm worried too, but it's been 5 years. We have to consider all options." Before Emmer could respond, her phone buzzed, an unknown number lighting the screen. She answered cautiously. "Mr. Dawson," a deep voice asked. "This is Ali Granger. We haven't met, but I believe we need to talk." Ali Granger was a well-known figure in ex-wealthy, reclusive, and respected. His sudden interest left Emmer uneasy. "About what?" she asked wearily. "About Ranger," he replied, "and about Victor Langston." Curiosity edged out caution, and Emmer agreed to meet him at the Rusty Spoon Cafe that afternoon. Snowflakes clung to her coat as she stepped into the diner, eyes scanning for Ali. He stood to greet her from a back booth, offering a polite handshake. "Thanks for coming," he said gently. Once seated, he got right to the point. "I imagine you're wondering why someone like me would get involved in your family's business." Emmer tensed. "Yes, actually." "Why are you involved?" Ali's expression turned grave. "Because Langston's interest in Ranger goes beyond business." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "Your husband Mark was investigating Noviker Biotech before he died, wasn't he?" Emmer froze. Mark had mentioned a sensitive case shortly before his death, but he'd kept the details from her. "My daughter Hannah worked at Noviker," Ali continued, his voice heavy. "She discovered they were conducting illegal chemical trials. She reported it. 3 weeks later, she died in a so-called accident." Emmer's skin chilled. "Mark was digging into her case," Ali said. "I have reason to believe that's what got him killed." He paused. "Ranger was part of that investigation, trained to detect those exact substances. Langston doesn't want the dog for work. He wants to silence what he knows." Emmer's mind spun. It wasn't just about Luna anymore. This was bigger and far more dangerous. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Most people don't," Ali said. "But Ranger, he's the key to something much larger than any of us." With a storm in her heart, Emmer entered her house through the front door. Luna was cuddled up on the couch with her arms encircling a framed picture of Mark and Ranger. As she sat next to her, Emmer combed her daughter's hair. Whispering, "I promise, Lunar," she said. "We're going to bring Ranger home." Lunar looked up. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything: trust, hope, and the deep pain. She had carried it for far too long. And in that moment, Emmer knew they weren't just fighting for a dog. They were fighting for Lunar's voice, for their family's healing, for the truth that Mark had died trying to reveal. Later that night, as snow drifted quietly outside, Emmer sat frozen at her laptop. The email on the screen blurred through her tears, but the meaning was clear. It was a message from Langston's assistant. It thanked Greg for his continued efforts to turn community members against her, urging them to pull support from her campaign to adopt Ranger. Emmer's hands trembled as betrayal took root. Her husband, Greg, was working against them from within. Her heart shattered again as she looked toward Lunar's chamber. Her daughter's father had already passed away. The one part of him she still had could now be taken away by someone she trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than Emmer Dawson had imagined. Clutching the printed email and shaking hands, she walked into the kitchen, where Greg Taylor stood by the counter sipping his morning coffee, unaware of the storm about to hit him. Without a word, Emmer slammed the paper down in front of him. Greg jumped, startled. "What is this?" Her voice was low, laced with fury. Greg glanced down, reading. He sighed heavily and rubbed his temples, already anticipating the confrontation. "It's not what you think," he said, though guilt flickered in his eyes. "Not what I think," Emmer snapped, her voice sharp and raw. "You've been actively undermining us. Undermining Lunar, turning people against our family." "I'm trying to help," Greg shot back defensively. "Don't you see? Lunar's attachment to Ranger isn't healthy. Langston can give the dog structural purpose. Luna needs to let go." Emmer stared at him, stunned. "He's her lifeline, Greg. The last piece she has of her father. And you're helping someone tear that away from her." Greg turned his gaze away, shoulders tense. "I didn't want to hurt her," he muttered, "but this obsession is pulling us apart. It's destroying any chance of a normal life." Tears burned in Emmer's eyes, but her voice stayed strong and steady. "Lunar's healing is our life, Greg. If you can't see that, if you can't support that, then maybe you don't belong here." Her words hung between them, heavy with consequence. Greg didn't argue. He simply nodded, his face hollow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and walked quietly out of the room. That afternoon, Emmer sat in a quiet corner booth at the Rusty Spoon Cafe, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Ellie Granger sat across from her, listening carefully as she explained everything. "Langston's using Greg to sabotage us," she said, "and it's working. Several major donors have already pulled their support." Ellie's expression darkened. "Langston's influence runs deep, but he's reckless," he said thoughtfully. "He's betting on you folding under pressure." Emmer's gaze sharpened. "I won't fold. But I need your help, Ellie. I can't do this alone." He nodded solemnly. "We both have something personal at stake here, and we'll see this through together." As the waitress refilled their cups and moved away, Ali leaned in, lowering his voice. "I've arranged a meeting tomorrow," he said. "There's someone who might have critical information, someone who used to work for Noviker, but it's risky. We have to tread carefully." Emmer agreed immediately. The possibility of exposing the truth of honoring Mark's sacrifice gave her new strength. That night, Emmer sat beside Lunar's bed. The little girl clutched her father's old badge in her hands, the metal dulled from years of touch. Emmer gently brushed Lunar's hair back. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "tomorrow I'm going to meet someone who might help us bring Ranger home." Lunar's eyes widened slightly. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached out and squeezed her mother's hand, a silent promise of trust. The next day, Emmer and Ellie stood outside a weathered farmhouse on the edge of Willow Creek. An older man with weary eyes stepped out to meet them. "Daniel Frey," he said, a former Novacare biotech employee. He led them inside cautiously. "I worked with Ellie's daughter," he said nervously. "She was digging too deep trying to expose Novacare's illegal testing programs." He handed Ellie a worn folder filled with documents. "These show chemical trials that were never approved, substances that are dangerous and highly restricted. Your daughter died because she knew too much, and so did Officer Dawson. He and Ranger got too close. Langston knows the dog is evidence, and he's not going to stop." Emmer's pulse pounded as she flipped through the pages. Her husband had died protecting these secrets. Now she held the proof in her hands and a chance to finish what he started. Daniel looked at her, his expression grave. "This isn't just about your daughter. Or your dog. These people are dangerous. If they find out I talked to you," Emmer met his gaze, resolve hardening inside her, "I won't let them hurt anyone else. Not again." Later that evening, Emmer returned home and locked the documents safely away. She stepped quietly into Lunar's room and found her sleeping, still clutching her father's badge. She leaned in, gently smoothing her daughter's hair. "I promise," she whispered, "I'll protect you, always." Downstairs, Greg sat alone at the kitchen table, shadows flickering across his weary face. When Emmer entered, he looked up, eyes full of regret. "I made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "I thought getting rid of Ranger would help Lunar move on, but I see now I only made things worse." Emmer's voice was calm but unwavering. "If you want to make this right, then stand with us now. Support Lunar. Support Ranger. Not Langston." Greg nodded slowly, sincerity softening the lines in his face. "I will," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes. I will, whatever it takes." Emmer stood at the doorway, pausing only a moment. "I hope you mean it, Greg, because right now trust is all we have left." That night, as snow blanketed the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Emmer lay awake. Her thoughts were heavy but clear. There was a battle ahead, one that would test everything they had left, but for Lunar's healing, for Mark's legacy, and for the truth she would fight, no matter the cost. The fight ahead would be long and uncertain. It would demand strength, courage, and sacrifice. But as Emma Dawson lay in bed, listening to Lunar's soft, rhythmic breathing through the thin wall, she knew exactly why she would fight. Because Lunar deserved healing, because Mark deserved justice, and because Ranger deserved to come home. The morning sun rose pale and distant over Willow Creek, casting a cold hush over the sleepy town, the kind of stillness that settled just before a storm. Inside the Dawson home, 7-year-old Lunar sat quietly at the kitchen table, dressed in her very best, her pale blue dress buttoned to the collar and a cardigan too light for winter. Her small fingers clutched the chipped pink piggy bank she had guarded for years. She hadn't spoken a word since the night before, but her silence carried more determination than any speech ever could. Her eyes never once left the window. In the kitchen, Emma moved with nervous purpose, carefully braiding Lunar's hair into 2 neat plaits. Her hands trembled slightly. Near the door stood Gregor, quiet observer. The tension between him and Emma had eased, if only slightly. He had done the unthinkable, withdrawn his support from Langston, even donating the remainder of his savings to Lunar's cause. They drove in silence toward the Willow Creek Community Center, where the annual law enforcement auction was already underway. Outside, news vans were lined up like sentinels, cameras rolling. Inside, every seat was filled, donors, reporters, officials, all eyes on the event's final act. But Lunar had eyes only for Ranger. The moment Officer Mediner led the German Shepherd into the hall, his ears perked, nose twitching. His eyes scanned the crowd and then stopped. Frozen, he had found her. His body tensed, then slowly relaxed, his tail giving a hopeful wag. A soft, longing whine rose from his throat. People noticed. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "That's her, the Dawson girl." Emma squeezed Lunar's hand gently. "Stay close, sweetheart," she whispered. The auction opened with the usual Flair vacation packages, gift baskets, and department memorabilia. But everyone knew what they had come for. A tall auctioneer in a too-tight suit approached the podium. "Next," he boomed, his voice echoing through the hall, "Canine Ranger. 7 years old, certified in narcotics detection, search and rescue, and criminal apprehension. Starting bid, $2,500. Emma raised her paddle. $3,000. The auctioneer called out. Across the room, Victor Langston, sharp in a tailored navy suit, raised his paddle without glancing in Lunar's direction. $3,000 from bidder 42. The auctioneer confirmed. $3,500. Came a calm voicely Granger. The bidding moved fast. 4,000. 5. 6. Greg gently placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. She nodded and raised her paddle again. That was their final bid. Lunar, sitting silently beside them, opened her piggy bank. Gently, she laid the coins and crumpled dollar bills onto her lap, one by one. Her hands trembled. $7,000, Langston called, cool and unbothered. Ali didn't flinch. $10,000. A hush swept the room. Langston leaned toward the auctioneer. 13. Ali raised again. 15. Emma's chest tightened. This was already beyond what they had. 20. Langston barked. A pause. Then Ali stood. $35,000. Gasps rippled through the audience. The auctioneer blinked. 35,000. From bidder 28. From bidder 28? Do I hear 40? Langston hesitated. One of his associates leaned in, whispering. Then, 45. Suddenly, Lunar's voice pierced the stillness. Wait. Every head turned. Lunar stood, holding her pink piggy bank in both hands. Her voice was shaky but unmistakably clear. I want to add my money. The auctioneer looked unsure. Miss, this is an adult auction. She's a bidder, Ali said calmly. And that's her savings. Lunar stepped into the aisle, her little shoes tapping softly on the wooden floor. Ranger stood alert now, tracking her every move. Officer Mediner held the leash firmly, but the dog didn't move. He waited. Luna held up a single dollar bill. This is everything I have, she said, tears in her voice. Please, he's not just a dog. He was my dad's partner. He's all I have left. The hall fell silent. Even Langston looked rattled. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Current high bid, 45,000. Do I hear more? Ali raised his paddle. 60,000. Langston shot to his feet. 70. But before the auctioneer could call the next number, Ranger broke his command. With a sudden pull, he tore away from the handler's grip. Officer Medina held firm at first, then hesitated. The leash slipped. Coins spilled as Lunar dropped the piggy bank, the ceramic crashing to the floor like scattered stars. Her savings danced across the wood. Ranger trotted straight to her and sat, pressing his body against her legs protectively. Lunar dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. "No more bids," Ali said quietly. His voice was calm but final. 75,000, he added. Langston stared at him, jaw clenched. But he didn't counter. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, gavel cracking against the podium. "To bidder 28 for $75,000. Applause erupted, some from relief, others from joy. Emma ran to Lunar, tears streaming, and pulled both her daughter and Ranger into her arms. Greg followed, silent, but present. No longer divided, but just as Officer Medina reached for the leash again, Sheriff Keller stepped forward. His voice was loud and firm. "Not so fast." The room fell quiet once more. Per department policy, a working canine must be formally decommissioned before placement in civilian care, the sheriff stated. And Lunar can't be his handler, she's a minor. Liability is a real concern. Emmer's heart sank. The fight was far from over. "She's a minor," Sheriff Keller repeated flatly. "Liability is a serious concern. Policy doesn't cover." Whatever that was back there, Ali Granger stepped beside Emmer, his tone calm but firm. "Sheriff, you've got the check. The dog's been paid for. Let's take this to the town council." Keller frowned, jaw tight. "I sympathize with your position, but rules exist for a reason." Lunar looked up at him from where she still knelt beside Ranger, her arms wrapped tightly around the dog's neck. "My dad said Ranger protects people," she said, her voice steady. "That's what he does. That's who he is." Ali gently rested a hand on her small shoulder. "In the meantime," he said, looking directly at the sheriff, "the payment stands. Max goes home with them tonight." Keller's eyes moved between them, all hard, but thoughtful. "Only temporarily," he relented. "The final placement decision will be made after council review." Emmer felt her knees threaten to buckle with relief, but she stayed upright, steady for Lunar's sake. Ranger was coming home. But tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The following morning, the Willow Creek Town Hall felt more like a courtroom than a council chamber. Rows of metal folding chairs were filled with townspeople, off-duty officers, reporters, and local officials. A long table stretched across the front where the town council, Sheriff Keller, and district legal advisors were seated. At the very center of the room, Lunar Dawson sat holding tightly to Ranger's leash like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. To her right, Emmer sat tall and composed, though her every breath was layered with tension. On Lunar's other side, Greg Taylor adjusted his tie, a new resolve in his eyes, a man trying to atone. Across the room, Victor Langston sat surrounded by his legal team, their suits sharp, their faces unreadable. And at the back of the chamber, arms crossed, eyes focused, stood Ali Granger, silent but unwavering. Councilwoman Elaine Brooks opened the meeting with a calm, deliberate tone. "This hearing concerns the placement of Canine Ranger, a retired service dog. The Dawson family has petitioned for private civilian custody due to exceptional emotional and psychological circumstances. We are here to determine whether an exception to departmental policy can be granted." Sheriff Keller cleared his throat. "With all due respect," he began, "this is about public safety. Ranger is a highly trained narcotics and search and rescue dog. These dogs aren't household pets. They require certified handlers. Lunar Dawson is a minor." Before Emmer could speak, Greg stood. "I was the one who doubted all of this from the beginning," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I thought Lunar's bond with Ranger was holding her back, that it was unhealthy. I was wrong." He glanced at the girl seated beside him, her back straight, eyes focused ahead. "That dog didn't trap her. He brought her back. He's the reason," she started, speaking again, "the reason she's healing." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Councilwoman Brooks raised a hand. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor." She turned to a man seated in the front row. "Dr. Laurie, would you speak to Lunar's current psychological condition?" Dr. Simon Laurie stood, his expression warm but professional. "Lunar displays symptoms of selective mutism, triggered by traumatic grief following the loss of her father," he explained. "Traditional therapies yielded minimal progress until regular interaction with Ranger resumed. Since then, We've seen dramatic improvements in her verbal expression, emotional regulation, and social connection. He looked directly at the council members. Removing Ranger now could cause a significant regression. It would be, in my opinion, profoundly damaging. A man from Langston's team rose to respond. While we sympathize, legal frameworks exist for a reason. Ali stepped forward, his voice slicing clean through the argument. Then let's change the framework. The room stilled. I've established a trust, Ali said. It covers professional training, liability insurance, veterinary care, therapy support, everything needed for Ranger's continued service. Certified canine professionals will monitor his transition under Luna's care. This isn't charity, he added. It's responsibility. And frankly, that little girl is more prepared to carry it than most grown men. Langston's attorney stood abruptly. Mr. Ranger has a personal stake in this. He's not impartial. Ali cut in, calm but forceful. My daughter, Hannah, worked at Novaker Biotech, the same company your client now contracts with. She died 5 years ago while uncovering illegal chemical testing. He looked directly at Langston. Officer Mark Dawson was investigating that case. Ranger was his partner trained to detect those very chemicals. He paused. Langston isn't here for the dog. He's here to bury what the dog remembers. The crowd went silent. Councilwoman Brooks leaned forward, her voice sharper now. Do you have documentation to support that? Ali's lawyer stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the council's table. Internal memos, training logs, whistleblower reports, Ranger's alert records, all from the months leading up to Officer Dawson's death. The council began flipping through the pages. Even Sheriff Keller furrowed his brow as he skimmed the records. I remember this case, he muttered. Mark was onto something big. Councilwoman Brooks turned her gaze on Langston. Your continued pursuit of Ranger, despite repeated denials and the psychological impact on this child, is deeply concerning. Then she turned to Lunar. Would you like to speak, Miss Dawson? The room held its breath. Lunar looked up. Her voice trembled, but it came out clear and full of heart. Ranger was my dad's partner. Now he's mine. She took a deep breath. He keeps me safe. He helps me remember. He helps me talk again. A moment of stillness. Then the room burst into hushed emotion. I don't want another dog, Lunar Dawson said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. I want him. For a moment, the room was silent, completely still. Then Councilwoman Elaine Brooks gave a slow nod. We've heard enough. The council members stood and stepped away for deliberation. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Lunar sat in absolute stillness, Ranger's head resting on her knee like a warm weight of reassurance. She didn't move, didn't speak. Beside her, Emma kept her arm around her daughter's shoulders, her fingers gently trembling as they held tight. She didn't speak either, afraid even a breath might shatter the fragile hope clinging in the air. At last, the council returned. Councilwoman Brooks cleared her throat, her voice steady, though softer than before. In light of the extraordinary circumstances, she began, and the comprehensive safeguards presented for Ranger's continued care and supervision, the council has reached a unanimous decision. She paused, then smiled gently. Ranger will remain with the Dawson family permanently. The room erupted. Applause echoed through the hall. Some stood. Others wiped at their eyes. Emma pulled Luna into her arms, tears flowing freely now. Greg leaned down, pressing a kiss to Lunar's head, his eyes glassy with emotion. And Ranger, sensing the shift in energy, let out a low, satisfied woof, his tail thumping softly against the floor. But Councilwoman Brooks wasn't done. Furthermore, she said, lifting her voice slightly, Ranger's status will be changed from retired service dog to certified therapy dog. From this day forward, he will continue his work, this time helping children like Lunar. Gasps and more applause followed. Victor Langston and his attorneys quietly packed their briefcases. No words, no glances. They slipped out through a side door, unnoticed by most and unmissed by all. Outside, neighbors had gathered along the walkway. They clapped as Lunar stepped outside, Ranger faithfully by her side. Reporters leaned forward to catch a glimpse of the little girl who had taken on the Sisterman one. That night, back at home, Lunar curled up on the porch swing, her legs tucked beneath her as she leaned into Ranger's thick fur. The dog lay calmly beside her, ears flicking at the sound of frogs chirping down by the creek. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh-cut grass, the scent of summer's early promise. Inside, Emma poured 2 mugs of hot cocoa and brought them out to the porch. Greg followed behind her, a small wrapped box in his hands. "What's this?" Luna asked, her voice steadier than it had been in years. Greg smiled and sat down beside her. "It belonged to your dad," he said gently, offering her the box. "Figured Ranger helped you find your way back. You might as well have something to help guide you forward." Luna peeled away the wrapping to reveal a weathered brass compass, its face scratched from years of use. Luna looked up at the stars above them, glowing faintly in the night sky. Then she looked down at the dog by her side, who raised his head just enough to nuzzle her knee. "I think he was right," she whispered. Emma, sitting beside her with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, turned to look at her daughter. "Who was right, sweetheart?" Luna opened her palm, revealing the worn brass compass. The metal was cool against her skin, still beautiful despite the scratches. She turned it over slowly, running her fingers across its edges. "You know what Daddy used to say about Ranger?" she asked softly. Emma smiled, her eyes misting. "Tell me." "He said Ranger could always find what was lost." Emma reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Luna's face, her heart aching and full all at once. And as they sat there, mother, daughter, and the loyal dog who had brought them home again, the night held them in a quiet kind of peace.